I'd like to immediately transition by welcoming our special guest today, Erik Ekudden, the Chief Technology Officer at Ericsson. We now begin to move into a hands-on experience, even a more hands-on experience from one of the long-standing innovators and providers of digital infrastructure for the digital economy and digital trade developments we're seeing in front of us. And this session, of course, is about technology's role in digital transformation for all. And with that, I'd like to welcome Erik and thank you for the time, Erik.
Well, thank you, Peter, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. Great to be with you here. I thought I'd kick it off, Peter, with just a little bit of a framing, a few slides, and then we can get back into a dialogue about some of those, I would say, challenges, but also opportunities that you mentioned. This is really about the role of technology, mobile technology, digital technologies, and I'm sure others have touched upon this before. But if we look at where we are right now, it's about 1 million new 5G subscriptions that are added every day during this year. And that means that we will reach some 580 million 5G subscriptions already by the end of this year, 2021. And if we fast forward to 2026, 5 years out, 60% of the world population will actually have access to 5G, and we will have as much as 3.5 billion 5G subscriptions. Many markets that would have been transition over to more 5G than 4G subscriptions, actually in many of the early markets. And there is a phenomenal uptake in terms of having access to higher bandwidth, lower latency in terms of the data that is consumed. So here you see that, and this is a 3- to 4-fold increase in data that is consumed per month, 35 gigabyte monthly global average usage per smartphone, which is, of course, a phenomenal uptake, and operators around the world need to dimension for that over the coming 5 years. So it's growing faster than previous generations of technology, faster than 4G and, of course, the earlier ones, but it's also opening up for businesses outside of the consumer space. And I think this is really the excitement that we all share now, when the strength of digital technology, the strength of 5G as a global innovation platform really can help society at large, and of course small, medium businesses, enterprises to digitalize. Noting here that our main business is really to provide the digital infrastructure, 4G, 5G, fixed networks, access networks, core network communication services, OSS and BSS systems. And from our point of view, this is very much about what some previous speakers were into. This is about sustainability, being energy efficient. This is about robustness and resilience. It's also about security built into the network fabric itself. But it's also a journey when it comes to moving to new technologies. We are building with the latest cloud-native technologies and data-driven technologies. And for many of our customers, operators around the world, this is a new world where they have to adopt new technology, change the way that they operate it, and still maintain the high quality that consumers, enterprises, and society at large have come to expect from mobile systems, mobile and fixed systems. But the layer in between here, the middle layer, is really important, because we knew that from the app economy in 4G, we knew that from the cloud journey, that it does matter how you build applications on top of 4G. And here you see some examples of those platform values, Peter. You have coverage and capacity. It's about indoor coverage. It's about coverage in rural areas. It's about coverage everywhere. But it's also about the higher speed that you need to expect, and you need to be granted higher speed and lower latency for many of the applications, not the least the kind of applications that we talk about right now with video conferencing and productivity tools in the enterprise space. But it's also about linking this to the enterprises themselves with service orchestration, exposure, and how to build 5G into the routers in the enterprise, maybe with private networks and network slicing, so that you can order network quality from the outset with a certain level in terms of bitrate and bandwidth and resiliency and security. And if you need more because you have a more demanding enterprise use case, then of course you need to be able to order that and instantly get access to it. You don't want to build a new infrastructure for those needs. All of this is supported by 5G through network slicing and the new orchestration interfaces. And of course, IoT and IoT solutions is a big part. So much of the dialogue now, I think, is on the upper use cases. Which of the industries are first to reap the benefit, adopt these new platform values and capabilities? Because for them, this is their best digitalization tool. To move on to 4G and now 5G is their fastest way to be competitive in a global space, but also to offer better services. Of course, it could be anything from more energy efficient solutions in the sustainability area to really work from home that many of us have experienced now, 18 months and more. But it could also be things that are really radically changing the relation in construction, smart manufacturing, to everything in the first responders and advanced public safety area. So here we see many more requirements being put on this platform, and that's one of the reasons that we truly look at it as an innovation platform. And as such, of course, it also means that our job is to work with the ecosystem, making sure that startups and mature enterprises get access to the right developer environments, get access to new business models so they can consume these services, and also, of course, work with labs and test systems and proof of concept to be able to really work out the new ways of working, especially in the enterprise space. So this brings us to the next slide, which is just a few examples from the enterprise space. We have monitoring and tracking being perhaps an obvious one, but there we have efficiency gains that are very obvious, 10-15% easily when you introduce this in a logistics chain, for example, in a port. You have the remote operations. Mines were early with remote operations, and now we see it in many more areas. The characteristics of 5G with secured latency and robustness and resiliency really helps, for example, in this case, a mining company to completely digitalize their mining operation. Augmented reality is becoming a reality in smart manufacturing. We use it ourselves in the Ericsson 5G factories where we build 5G gear, and you have it for inspection. You make it a pervasive part of the tooling inside the factory where we have a 5G dedicated network supporting them by operators on their spectrum. And we have many other examples there, real-time automation, and enhanced video services. You have the connected fleet, connected vehicles. Smart surveillance with drones and also smart delivery with drones is becoming an important area, more cost efficient. And there we need to look at all the security safety aspects as well as regulation aspects. How do you control drones in a safe and secure manner at the same time as we are leveraging global connectivity with 4G and 5G and of course completely new drone technology. Autonomous robotics is another big area that we're moving the brain part from the robots into the local cloud and connecting it over a 5G network. So you get the flexibility on the shop floor at the same time as you get higher performance in your factory. With that, I think if you move to the next slide, just gonna make a few more comments, which actually has to do with the Ericsson purpose of creating connections that makes the unimaginable possible. What can we see over the coming 5 to 10 years? And I certainly would like to call out the importance of the engagement of governments, and I would say all governments and all levels, because this doesn't come without a strong commitment from both the private side as well as the public side. And regulations play a very important part there. We know from the mobile era that, and we've seen it in the consumer space, that availability of spectrum in mid-band, 3.5 gigahertz, typically 2.5 to 3.5 gigahertz, high bands, 24, 26, 28, 37, 39 gigahertz, that is really the lifeblood of being able to do this digitalization. And making that available with long license terms and without pre-industry taxation, with high costs for assessing or for getting access to spectrum and being able to roll out, those are preconditions that are super important. Also the investment climate, how can you ensure that the right foundation for service providers are there so that they can invest and build nationwide coverage. We now see some countries have already passed 95% population coverage with 5G, and this is 2021, while others have many cycles of investments to go through to get to that level, and that needs to be accelerated for the country to have a strong digital infrastructure. And of course it comes back to technology neutrality and making sure that the market forces are able to act on an open market when it comes to using best technology, but also knowing that leveraging global scale. I mentioned a few of the facts about 5G, and then of course we've learned that over the generations, that really pays off, because then you make it easy for the ecosystem, you make it easy for the consumers, you make it easy for enterprises to adopt and scale the globally available standardized technology such as 5G. And that's also the tooling when it comes to high requirement on network performance, quality of service that I heard some were into before. Because this is the way that you can, over time, of course, improve, but you can get guarantees that the whole ecosystem is working on solving these kind of robustness, resilience issues over the coming generations. So with that, Peter, that quick introduction, I think I should hand it back to you.
Erik, thank you very much. People have your bio in the pack, so I didn't want to, we were running a bit late, I didn't want to take any time away from that, but it is worth calling out that as the CTO, you're responsible for setting the overall strategy and technology leadership for Ericsson. Of course, in terms of the importance of the digital infrastructure, this is really the basis for everything that we're talking about for these few days. You and I were talking about the excitement of the industry we're in and everything that's coming last night. Just to make the point for the people who are in attendance here, and I'll call out the chat bar on the side, you're not the shyest of characters, Erik. You don't mind taking questions from people. I'm watching a little bit of hesitancy from the participants so far, but I was thrilled to get a practitioner on to the IIC's annual forum like yourself these days that begins to tie up the implementation we have to do with these massive rollout programs and the excitement of everything that's in front of us with the use cases. And that slide you had, the third slide, which begins to tie these together from the digital infrastructure through to the use cases. We'll get to the use cases in a minute. Your figure's impressive, 1 million new subscribers, 5G subscribers per day. We're heading up towards 500 million subscribers globally already. These are big numbers, and yet we're only going to be seeing 60% average global coverage or population coverage. It's still a few years out. Given that the title of this is Digital Transactions for All, and this is where you and I were focusing last night, what do we still need to do to make sure that we're really enabling this for all?
So I think there are a few things that's worth reminding ourselves of, and one is that this is the fastest scaling technology, all categories. So I mean, you could look at the other fast scaling tech industries, you could look at the cloud industry. This is an industry that is scaling very, very fast. So I don't think we should be overly concerned that we are only reaching 60% by 2026. In fact, what we have already today is a very strong backbone of 4G infrastructure, and that 4G infrastructure is helping countries, it's helping consumers, it's helping enterprises to digitalize already today. So there's no need to wait. But my message is really that because it's moving into higher and more demanding use cases, we need to also think about the quality of the digital infrastructure. And it's not enough to just think about the gigabit per second or the megabit per second and the fiber infrastructure. We talk about all processes being mobilized, meaning that the logistics chains are obvious, but remote work, schools from anywhere, any of those use cases that I have at the top there, they really require mobility. And mobility with quality requires 5G. That's where you need to have in your digital plan for the country. You need to really close that gap, making sure that you enable innovation, enable these enterprises to come on board. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that every country have a digital plan for introduction of 5G, and it's about coverage, getting to 95, almost 100% population coverage as soon as possible. That needs to be part of the plans. And then, of course, that comes with some of the things I mentioned, spectrum availability, investment climate regulation, and so forth. But it also, I think, comes with partnerships. I know several have been into that as well. I think that this is a huge opportunity when coming back from the pandemic in terms of investing for growth, investing in the digital infrastructure. You know, we have the UN Broadband Commission State of the Union Broadband Report that was released just recently, and there we are also quoting some of the Ericsson Mobility Report numbers in terms of how fast it's going and where the gaps are. And I think that really calls for closing those gaps by upgrading the existing infrastructure, the existing towers with 4G and 5G. That's the most cost-efficient way to really close this gap. Of course, we will also explore new ways of doing it. We will explore new technology, new modality. But there isn't a faster and more cost-efficient way for countries, for government, and of course for operators and enterprises, then to just upgrade the existing gear from 2G, 3G to 4G, 5G, or from 4G to 5G. So that's really the way forward.
Yeah, the answer that you give leads us to the other half of that sentence on that, or the other half of the data points on that slide. You had the magic figure at the other end of the slide of 35 gigs of monthly mobile consumption usage as an average figure, as a global average figure. Back in the day when we were all rolling these networks out, the idea that we were going to be consuming that much on the mobile devices would have been seen a pipe dream by most people. They're phenomenal consumption figures, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. But I think it's part of that, and I think it's phenomenal, just as you put it. I mean, there is consumption in terms of video services like we have now. There is consumption in terms of education videos. There is, of course, all the entertainment part and many other things. But one thing that is striking is that 70% of the world's service providers, operators now, they have already launched fixed wireless access services. So instead of offering a fixed line service with a fiber or a DSL modem or something else, they're actually offering a mobile service, a 4G or 5G service. We call it fixed wireless access. So 70% of the operators already have that. And if you are in a more stationary environment, in your home or in another small medium office building, for example, then of course consumption goes up, because we know that enterprise usage is a lot of the productivity takes a lot of data as well. So in the coming years, we actually see that the data grows. The portion of data that comes from fixed wireless access and therefore enterprise growth, it is growing at a staggering rate. So I think there's a big trend now to really look at mobile, and especially 5G, as the first line of access rather than a backup or something that comes at the later stage. It becomes the first choice for connectivity, even in people's home. The early adopters, they are actually moving into 5G because of the higher bandwidth and the better characteristics than just using their cabled home or their Wi-Fi home. So it's a big trend shift.
Just on that, Erik, how much do you think that the use case has now been brought home about that? We still have a number of countries, regulators, governments wrestling with the idea of whether the return on investment is yet there at the mass scale. They've got bits and pieces of the use cases, but your point there that people are going to be migrating, are already doing it, to 5G for effectively consumer consumption, which it took us years to do when we hit the 3G and then the 4G changes. Your point, the fact we're already there in terms of 5G, how do we get people across that line if that's where we are and the returns are going to be exponential in that virtuous cycle?
I think we need to do a better job as an industry to bring some of those best examples of exactly your point. Where is it happening and why is it happening? What are the conditions that makes it happen? Because it's not happening everywhere, to your point. I think it needs some of these regulatory preconditions. You need to allow certainly operators to make money, but you also need to get those enterprise use cases much clearer. So we have had for years, we've had our labs open for enterprises that want to explore 5G for mining, 5G for port, 5G for smart manufacturing, 5G for logistics. And they are now, those enterprise CEOs, they're now coming to us and certainly want to buy the network services that we have been exploring together. So there is a pent-up demand there, but that I think needs to be funneled. That insight or that understanding of which are the important and driving use cases, that also needs to be readily available to regulators, governments, so that they see that this is really in the making. But it needs to be, we need to unlock the brakes, so to say. We need to enable that by building out global, national coverage when it comes to 5G, because that is what many of these use cases demand. You cannot have a sort of a well-working logistics chain that is serving the countryside if you don't have network build out with 5G coverage also on the countryside, for example. You cannot just go for city centers. You cannot just go for limited deployment. So investments in digital infrastructure has to come before the actual benefits on innovation and all the gains that come on top. And I think this is true for all investments in infrastructure, and especially now in this transition to a much stronger reliance on the digital infrastructure. Granted, of course, we're all looking forward to a hybrid mode, Peter. We certainly want to have a mixed mode. So there's no question about that.
Yeah, well, when we're all wearing our glasses and you and I feel like we're sitting next to each other, drinking something worthwhile, even though we're still a couple of continents apart. I get it. But can I just challenge that just gently a little bit? I mean, you and I both believe that. Are the service operators that you work with, are they there yet? Have they come through that looking glass? One of the things that I wonder about, and I'm watching this through multiple governments in Asia where I am, is that the pandemic has brought home to the governments the reality of your statements, the reality that people need to be on the networks, that where they were maybe taking the supply side approach, they've got to slam these networks out now because the work from home, the education, the healthcare enablement pieces, and now the logistics supply, the networks need to be there and they need to be robust. Are the service operators, you're there, we're there, have the service operators digested this? Are they ready to roll out at velocity now?
I would say that the ones at the forefront, the leaders, they are absolutely there and they are pushing us very hard. And rightly so, I would say, because this is, of course, we all experience the terrible effects of the pandemic, but we are also learning, as you say, that we need to do even more. We need to build even faster. We need to make sure that there is robustness and resiliency even more than we have done in the past for best effort mobile broadband. We have to get things like network slices out there so you can get your guaranteed service. We need to have backup and robustness that allows also disasters to not knock out the complete network infrastructure. I think clearly the leaders are there in terms of the investment needed and the importance of being early in this cycle. I think there is perhaps more of a spread out realization to your point. I think I would love to see even more of operators taking the learnings from the leaders here, because this is really a great cookbook for a blueprint for how to really do it. We have leading customers basically in all geographies in the world, in APAC, in Europe, in North America, in Africa, and so forth, where we can see that these realizations are now being put into early plans. But I would encourage speeding up even more. I think your point about what we learned is also that many of the data points that we used to say that these are 2030 kind of aspirations, now we can start to see that, and it's not only Ericsson, we can see that by many studies that we probably accelerated the maturation by years. Some would claim it's 5 years, but even if it's only 2 years, it's a big change in awareness, people's mindset, and also what the technology can do. So I think it's an acceleration by years.
Yeah, the numbers that we're seeing have depending on geography and in more particular sector, that potentially we're seeing a 5 to 8 year acceleration because of the pandemic and the effects, which will be interesting to see how it plays out. I know we're going to run out of time soon. And I wanted to just touch on some of the challenges, because you've raised interesting ones for people to be thinking through, and most particularly the use cases. But one question which your slides, and I think they're way more interesting than you gave credit for, because there's a lot in there that I was thinking of as you were running through them, is whether, in your opinion, the value chain of the telecommunications model, which is a digital economy model now, whether that's changing. When I look at your slide again, the penultimate slide where you've got the layers and we've got the digital infrastructure on the bottom and the use cases on the top, and I look at the cloud first piece, and I look at all of the industries at the top, the use cases, and I start thinking of SMEs and MSMEs, we really have disrupted that supply chain. People can actually just supply and purchase and procure their digital enablement wherever they are. How much is that supply chain changing, and how well is that appreciated? The value chain.
Well, I think that in general, this is what all industries are going through, and I think there is awareness at various levels. I think that the opportunity, and that comes back to what we've learned from the consumer era and the app economy and the cloudification, that is now hitting home in the society at large and in the enterprise. So I think the enterprises are super important, but you can take another example, which is really just the education piece. I don't know if you want to go into that now, Peter.
Please.
But just take the example of, because obviously we've learned that you need to have remote education over the last 18 months or so. In fact, it seems like more than 90%, 91% of students worldwide were in some way affected, not being able to go to school. And of course, that's more than 1.5 billion use. And at least a third of those actually didn't have access to distance learning. So if you look at how do we close that gap? Well, we have this mapping exercise with GIGA. We go from mapping 1 million schools now. We are aiming for mapping and connecting all 6 million schools by 2030. Of course, the complete chain, the supply chain of how do you build an education system that leverages digital, of course hybrid, but leverages digital, which needs that connectivity, which needs skilling and reskilling, which needs the applications, which may even need some of the most advanced AR and VR to be able to create a good education experience. That realization, I think, cannot come by just doing your part of the stack. You need to work cross-sectorial. You need to work with that use case end to end, where the network is a foundation piece, and then you get the enabling values to really create a great user experience, and then you have the application on top. So working in an ecosystem to foster that creativity and make it work, but also to roll it out. That is a really exciting time now, where I think there is readiness, more than ever readiness, but it doesn't come by itself, so to say. We have to work hard at creating new supply chains, to your point, new business models, sorry, and really make sure that those worthy causes like global education uplift and sustainability questions and global transportation issues, that they are taking on in a holistic view or a holistic way, not just looked at as point solution, where we look at the sort of traditional stovepipes and the existing sectors as the ones to solve the problem. Here we have more like a master model for how to digitalize sector after sector, industry after industry, and it really starts with a digital infrastructure with 5G. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I'm glad you called out the education example, and again, you know, it's one that I was fascinated by. It's worth just doubling down on calling that out. The GIGA project, which is the one that Erik's working on with the ITU and UNICEF, I believe.
With UNICEF, exactly.
Yeah, it's a massive program. But I was looking at that again just recently. The statistics that you've got on that, an increase in school and community connectivity can boost GDP by up to 20%. I mean, we've run those numbers on the basic connectivity GDP kicker for a while now, but those numbers are phenomenal again. And I think it's probably conservative as I was looking at it, because the focus was on school enablement. The point you're touching on was one I was going to bring you back to before, which is that reskilling and the workforce of the future enablement. We're actually setting this up for that much more ongoing re-enablement of workforces. That is where we're at right now.
Yeah, I can only agree. I think it's an area that is dear to myself, but I think you're right. This is not an individual view. This is really the big opportunity to change the way we think about lifelong learning, change the way that we think about hybrid digital and getting access to the best. But it starts really from the foundational pieces, the primary schools and the things we do from the very start, to be able to really have access from anywhere, from everywhere. And I think that's the worthy cause. But as you know, we have mapped around 1 million of the world's 6 million schools. And then over the coming years, we will for sure close that gap. But the real issue is to also close the gap with connectivity, because as I said, the most cost efficient way is to build out, upgrade, leverage the infrastructure that is in many cases already there. The mobile mass, the 2G mass, they're covering a very, very big part of the world's population, even if you don't have internet access because the data rates are not there, even if you don't have school access because the devices and the skills are not there, the things that are missing in the equation. But to upgrade that infrastructure is a big part of the solution to also connecting those 6 million schools.
Yeah, that driving linkage to innovation and creativity, and this is what the digital revolution should become all about. It's the industrial revolution next step, and that's the inclusivity piece. And I'm glad that you've doubled down on that. I know that they're going to want to wrap up in a second, but can I just, I mean, this is one of the parts of the conference that when people in this new hybrid world in which we live come back to and view the videos, they'll see your name, they'll see the Ericsson name, they'll want to come and review this. You've talked, and we've talked to the digital infrastructure piece, we've talked to the excitement of the opportunities that are coming, can I get you maybe just to do the call out to the challenges that you see? You've identified the investment requirements and some of the regulatory concerns. As the CTO of Ericsson, if you had to call out to the regulators around the world, what's the thing that in the countries, the leaders, what's the thing that you would focus them on as the challenges they need to get across? What would you call for?
Yeah, I think that now I'm actually spending quite some time answering questions and discussing what more we can do as an industry, because I think there is almost global realization that this is the opportunity of a lifetime, and so I see a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of willingness to adopt additions to the digital plans per country in terms of having solid mobile broadband rolled out everywhere. We talk about the 95+ coverage ambitions, the speed and the characteristics that you get with the latest technology. To do that, to really take that wholeheartedly on board and use this opportunity for investments that we are in many parts of the world in right now, that we have to invest ourselves back into the hybrid mode, to really use part of that to accelerate coverage rollout. And of course, it comes back to the things I mentioned about regulatory certainty, investment climate, spectrum access, the fees, all of those things, because that will unleash innovation that we have never seen before. And I think that is what every country now should be, and I think they are eager to get on board here.
Thank you. Erik Ekudden, the Chief Technology Officer of Ericsson, I thank you very much for your time. It's really a pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.